First, though, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by James Fishback, who is an advisor to the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as Doge, and CEO of Azoria Partners, I should say, an American investment firm. Thanks for joining us, James. Your thoughts on what you heard from the man himself in the White House today? Evening.
Well, good evening. The truth is that President Trump recognizes that talk is cheap. In his very unique and eloquent way, almost comedically, but truthfully, he says that he would have these beautiful phone calls with President Putin, 45, 50 minutes long, and say, wow, this guy is genuine about peace, only to find out from the first lady of all people that yet another part of Ukraine, another neighborhood in Kyiv, had been bombed by a Russian offensive attack. And so the president has had enough with President Putin's talk. He's now using two unique levers. The first, of course, is having NATO pay for American weapons to allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves. But the second, you touched on already, is the economic power of the United States. Of course, the United States is the largest economy in the world with a $25 trillion GDP. What that allows us to do is exert economic pressure, that leverage on Russia, not to necessarily end the war overnight, but to make a good faith effort to come to the negotiating table, a table that will be led by President Trump and his negotiators like Steve Witkoff, to hopefully bring this war to an end. And as the president said last summer in a CNN town hall, to stop the killing and the dying of innocent people, Russian or Ukrainian, it has to end.
Do you see what, I mean, some people here are scratching their head because I take your point about the phone calls, well-meaning, between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. But, I mean, if you'd asked anyone sort of 2 years ago that had told you that Vladimir Putin is not in listening mode, he's not a man who can really be negotiated with, and that's played out. Was the president slightly naive to take this approach?
Not at all. What the president did is he looked at a naive president in Joe Biden, who clearly did not get the situation under control. This war was completely preventable in January 2022. What the president wanted to do is he wanted to see what Putin's cards were. He wanted to see how genuine and how good faith of an effort this was going to be to bring this conflict to an end. Clearly, this conversation has been ongoing. The attacks have been ongoing. President Putin's diplomacy has not been genuine. And now it's time, as he always does, for President Trump to turn up the heat. And if President Trump turns up the heat, it's time to get out of the kitchen. President Putin has been given a deadline. Now there is both kinetic leverage in the new weapons and economic leverage in this threat of new tariffs up to 100% that would devastate the Russian economy if they don't come to the negotiating table and stop the killing. We are all created in God's image. Our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, our Russian brothers and sisters want to see this war come to an end. And I'm sure that it will over these 50 days under Trump's leadership.
Why has this change in approach come about? Do you think it's just out of frustration with Vladimir Putin, or is he starting to realise now? Because, I mean, I thought it was quite interesting, him talking with Mark Rutte from NATO, really understanding the sort of fury in Europe and the worry in Europe on this. Do you think he genuinely has now sort of recalibrated his approach, his thoughts on the issue?
I think he has. And I think it's also been helpful that NATO members at that summit 2 weeks ago have actually committed to increase defense spending to their fair share of 5% of GDP. That was a massive increase. That certainly helped the president come to this decision to get behind Ukraine and to turn up the pressure on Russia. But make no mistake, the president is not on Ukraine's side. They are not on Russia's side. The president is on the side of peace. He said that eloquently in a town hall with Caitlin Collins last summer when he said that he just wants the dying to stop. He's not on either party's side. He wants to bring the conflict to a close. And as we saw just a few months ago in the Oval Office, when the president and the vice president unleashed on Zelensky for his ingratitude, for his duplicity, for his disingenuous ways at that point in time, he will turn up the pressure on either party in either conflict, whether it's this one or Iran and Israel, to finally bring folks to the negotiating table. Anybody who doubts whether President Trump can bring the peace should look to the 12-day war and the immediate cessation of conflict between these sworn enemies, Israel and Iran. He did it then. he'll do it again with Russia and Ukraine.
You work with money, of course, with Doge, but also the of Azoria Partners, the investment firm. The Russia, as far as I think, it's about 60% of their exports are Russian oil. We know that they've found ways in the past of getting through that, getting past various sanctions by sort of finding these sort of strange bodies that can do it that are not quite the Russian state. They will have a plan to bypass this. Do you think it really will hit them economically, these new sanctions?
It will, absolutely. The Russians have exploited loopholes for years to evade these sanctions, especially under President Biden's lack of leadership. I can't even call it leadership. It's lack of leadership. What President Trump has designed is a system called the secondary tariff. The countries that go behind the U.S.'s back, that circumvent our sanctions, will themselves be tariffed in the secondary manner. And so what the president is doing is saying, don't try it. Don't even think about it. Engaging with Russian oil. If you do, you will face economic consequences, which in turn means that Russia will pay the price. The president does not want to put these tariffs on Russia. The president wants to bring peace, but he's made it clear all options are on the table, economic and kinetic, with respect to giving weapons to Ukraine so they can defend themselves. That will bring the parties to the table and has the best shot of bringing peace in this 50-day window.
But why wasn't it done earlier then? Why wasn't this done on day one? President Trump promised to end the war on day one. That hasn't happened. If this sort of master plan, as he's hailing it, why didn't he do it on day one?
Well, look, the president was skeptical of both parties' intentions for genuine peace. President Zelensky has moved the goalpost at least a dozen times in just the past 6 months. Again, you saw our president and vice president rightfully blow up on Zelensky for his ingratitude, for his duplicity in the Oval Office. So there have been bad issues on both sides of this conflict. The truth is the president is wanting to see what both parties can bring to the table. Zelensky appears to be offering and operating in better faith than he was earlier this year. President Putin is not. And so the president has been waiting to see exactly what cards each side are holding. Now that he knows it's time to turn up the pressure, and that's exactly what he did today.
Lastly, while I've got you, can I ask you about Doge, Mr. Fishback? How is it all going? Has it been successful yet? Have you been on the phone to Elon much since he's left?
Well, look, Doge was started by President Trump shortly after he won his historic victory in November. He called it the Manhattan Project of our time, and he's absolutely right. Doge has saved upwards of $170 billion. That works out to about $1,100 per taxpayer in America. Money that was sent to Iraq for Sesame Street has now been defunded and is in the process of coming back to America. Money that was sent to a transgender opera in Colombia was defunded, is now being sent back to America. This is an effort that doesn't just begin in 6 months, but will span the entire 4-year Trump term, and ultimately is represented in a mindset that says that we respect the taxpayer and we're going to seek to protect their interests and their contributions while making the government as efficient as possible.
And Elon Musk?
Look, Elon's a good guy. I respect the heck out of him. I think his contributions are going to be in the private sector with Tesla, with SpaceX, and President Trump's contributions are going to be in the public sector as leader of the free world.
Okay, thank you very much. James Fishback is an advisor to Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency in America, and CEO of Azoria Partners, an American investment firm.